Hey kids, howdy and welcome once again to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. It is Monday, May 20th, and we're talking about the week of the 20th through the 26th. The easier month continues, although there's a big shift this month out of the Taurus focus into the Gemini focus. So we're going to talk a lot about the difference between the Taurus mansion and the Gemini mansion, because we're heating up with the Gemini energy starting today. But first,
It's Gemini season already?
already, baby, today's the start. 20th of
This
May.
year,
I know, listen,
wow.
I had one of those moments the other day, where I typed the date for some reason, because my business requires me to know what date it is. It's like I couldn't fucking believe it. We're practically halfway through the year. I don't understand.
No, I can't believe
All right.
that.
Well, it's funny because as of today with Gemini season, one of the things that is accurate is that we get a little bit more thoughtful and scattered in ideas and sharing and thinking about things like time moving fast. We're going to be doing a lot of thinking and talking for the next 4 weeks. But first, let's answer a question. So Paula writes, "Hi, Michael et al." At all. That's you, Zoe, and I guess the listeners. Maybe a question for the podcast. My deets, probably not for the podcast, which is true. I'm not going to give the specific deets, so I'll read this and edit. I have Saturn retrograde where it is, and I have Jupiter where it is. I am 58 and a half years old. It seems that around this time in life, you get a Saturn return plus a Jupiter return at the same time. What are you supposed to do with about at this double return? Thanks, Paula. Fabulous question. Yes, it's accurate and not quite. So let's sort of break this down first, the accuracy of it, and then we'll talk about how to be with such an energy. So I'm not a wild mathematician, so I don't know how to really say this in math terms, but you got a 29-year orbit and a 12-year orbit, and those counting time frames start when you take your first breath. In other words, you take your first breath and Jupiter's where it is, Saturn is where it is, and every 12 years from your birth date, Jupiter will return to the sign he was at your birth, and every 29 years, Saturn will do the same. That's the return planet. Because one is 29 years long and happens twice, and the second time is at about Paula's age, 59, that means you've also been through roughly 5 Jupiter cycles. So in almost all cases, a person's Saturn return is going to be followed shortly thereafter by a Jupiter return. The Jupiter return that happens every 12 years. So it's the proximity that Paul is talking about, that it's ironic. And indeed, I think this is wildly ironic. It's elegantly ironic. I mean, it's not like an irony of unconsciousness. It's the beautiful irony of how cycles work.
So it's about the same, but not exactly.
Yeah,
right?
exactly right. So everybody's going to have their second Saturn return at 59, and then they're going to have their fifth, if I'm doing the math right, fifth Jupiter return close by. Not the same year, usually a year later, maybe a year and a half later. Now, for my money, that's not simultaneous. Now, because I'm Mr. Precision. To me, it's like if the Saturn returns on a Thursday, it's on a Thursday and not on a Friday. Whereas a lot of astrologers would say your Saturn return is for the whole 2.5 years that Saturn is in the sign it was at your birth. And that wasn't my experience. I had my
Oh,
second Saturn return in 2022, and it literally started the week it started, and I remember the last weekend that it was exact in October of 2022, I had a real Saturn return kinda weekend. I fell down my stairs and injured my arm and my shoulder for
oh,
10
I
months. You remember
remember
that?
that.
Well,
Yeah.
that was my okay, so for my money, these are separate returns because the Jupiter return will come a year or so later. But if you look
Mm,
at the gestalt of the whole life, there is a juiciness to the simultaneity of the second Saturn return and the fifth Jupiter return. So it's important to start with the fact that the Jupiter return comes after and the Saturn return comes first. That is, the second Saturn return comes before the fifth Jupiter return. So at the second Saturn return, we are in a squeezing kind of threshold, crossing the border between our adult life into our elder years, where we become an elder, where we're designed to give, mentorship to the adults and receive wisdom from the ancestors. That's the chapter we move into after the second Saturn return. I call it the goddess period for women. Sometimes I'll call it the wisdom period for men. I'm in my wisdom period, although sometimes I think I'm in my goddess period. As we move towards more feminine energy. So, anybody in their second Saturn return is being taught what their life stream feels is important to match and meet the third chapter. So, first, we learn the lesson to become the best elder that we can. And about a year later, we get restored to our factory settings of abundance and prosperity with that fifth Jupiter return. Only now, this Jupiter return comes after our great wisdom threshold of the Saturn return. So that fifth Jupiter return that happens a year to a year and a half after the Saturn return allows a person to incorporate and understand a new level of how they can be in abundance and prosperity consciousness. And if they've been doing their Saturn work, they should be able to show up to that fifth Jupiter return really and truly ready to embrace abundance and prosperity as a way of life that they would not have had the wisdom to do at the fourth Jupiter return 10 years before the second Saturn return. So that to me is the value of these coming together around the same time, and they help create a final chapter that has the ability to be brilliant. That we're wise enough to meet the last 30 years of our lives with wisdom, and we're understanding enough of that abundance and prosperity is our birthright. We can go and create it with greater power and efficacy as a result of that return. Put them together, and the final chapter of your life can be extraordinary if you show up to the work you have to do. So yes, it is June 20th, and that's the start of the Gemini mansion. So when the sun is in Gemini, it's about ideas, the communication of them, and the desire to connect with others through the sharing of ideas. In the elegance of the unfolding zodiac, I like to tell the story of the void of Pisces is where we're all connected in a unity consciousness, and it's the energy of Aries that dives in and says, I'll go first. And so we start our astrological year with a consciousness of how we will go first, Aries mansion. Then we move into Taurus, where we say, well, why bother? Well, why bother is because there's great yummy to be had, because life in a body is actually quite sensual and pleasurable and beautiful. So Taurus teaches us how to appreciate the desire for the bounty that life in a body has to offer. So once we've mastered that, we come into this mansion where now it's about how do we, in a body, having a pleasurable experience, share that experience with others. And how do we do that? We do that through mind, thought, words, ideas, and the connecting with others through the sharing of ideas. So that's the mansion we've just stepped into. Check out the Gemini house in your natal chart if you know it, because that's where the action's going to be for the energy of the month. And just know that the conscious awareness place that we're in for the next 4 weeks is mental, intellectual, and about connecting with others. So I said at the top of the podcast that I was going to talk a little bit about how we're moving out of a really Taurus heavy couple of weeks and into the beginning of a Gemini heavy couple of weeks. Part of how that's happening is the sun, of course, leaving Taurus and into Gemini puts our, overall conscious awareness in a different mansion. But we have one last little Wednesday thrust of a Taurus expansion piece of yummy energy that also happens to be connected to the full moon on Wednesday. So I'm going to talk about these separately. So right now I'm just going to talk about Wednesday's gathering of Venus and Jupiter at the final mastery degree of Taurus. And then in the next segment of the podcast, I'll talk about the full moon. And we know that what I'm talking about now, is part of the full moon that we move through on Wednesday. So from the perspective that Taurus is the cash and prizes mansion, while a lot of planets have been in this sign, we have in fact been in the consciousness of attracting abundance and prosperity and more of that. Talked a lot last month about how all the pop astrologers were making me insane with the language like everyone's going to win the fucking lottery, and that was not the case. But still, Taurus is where we understand luxury and sensuality and pleasure and money and values. And everybody's been there for the last month, including Venus, the ruler of this mansion, and Jupiter, the planet through which we create abundance and prosperity. So the last bunch of months, almost year, that Jupiter has been in Taurus, we've been creating and manifesting from the mansion of greatest abundance and prosperity. Because Venus has been in Taurus for the last 3.5 weeks, that means each of us on the personal level, because Venus is a personal planet, as Venus moves, all of our emotional bodies are connected to what she's doing. And if Venus has been in her home turf of Taurus saying, this is what I promise you in life, and she's meeting up with Jupiter today, then literally today we've got this huge thrust of yummy possibility. The love that Venus promises and the expansion that Jupiter promises, and they're meeting up at the 30th mastery anaretic degree of Taurus. That means that again, this is about the full moon on Wednesday, which I'm not really talking about yet, in the middle of this week, as the solar consciousness is having us think about ideas and the sharing of them, in our hearts, we're still in the expansion of what's possible, where love and abundance come together in the reward sign, saying you really can have everything you desire. I, of course, as a psychologist, have to add, if you feel worthy of deserving it, and you have the talent to create it, and those parameters count.
Yes.
So there's like a handoff this week where we are finishing up and marinating in the possibility of the Taurus mansion's promise that we can have that and more of it, while also shifting gears to where we're now in conscious awareness of the Gemini mansion, ideas and connection and thought. And this full moon is an important moment where we have to release mental and intellectual blocks that might be inhibiting the flow of abundance. And I'll speak a little more in detail about that when we come back after the little musical interlude you hear in between. The full moon in Sagittarius is Thursday morning, just about 7 a.m. Pacific time. Sun in Gemini, moon in Sagittarius. So when the sun is in Gemini, our conscious awareness is about the thoughts, the ideas, the patterns, and the perceptions that we are having at the personal level. Gemini is in the first quadrant of the zodiac, part of the first, second, and third signs of the zodiac, which are all about the self. And so very much personal level of how you think, how you perceive, what are the ideas that you drive and rule your life by, so that in the opposite sign, Sagittarius, we are in consideration of higher truths, ideas at the personal level that the collective agree to and say, this is how we think collectively as a higher truth. The spiritual seeking that we do, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably one of those people, is a Sagittarius thought. That at the Gemini level, I have things I think at the personal level, but I'm aspiring to higher thought, spiritual thought, to be guided by a mind that isn't just in the lower pedestrian experiences of life, but the upper transpersonal experience of thoughts that guide us at a principled level. That's Sagittarius. So one thing we're certainly doing in a Sagittarius full moon is we're releasing all of the Gemini thoughts of doubt, fear, insecurity, overthinking, monkey mind, all the ways we can suffer because we're thinking too much or relying on our intellect too frequently. So loosely speaking, you could call any Sagittarius moon an opportunity to release the lower thoughts that we're having that inhibit our faster movement through our life towards what we desire, in favor of being guided by the energies we meet when we live life on a spiritual path. Now, because it's a full moon, it's a moment where we are releasing things from deep inside the unconscious mind. And so the fact that Pluto is dialing so directly into this full moon makes this a death rebirth lunation, even though the archetypes involved are more intellectual because it's Gemini and Sag. Pluto is participating so directly, and Pluto is the death rebirth planet who has the shadow and the Lord of the underworld capacity to change things. We really are moving through a death, rebirth, full moon in an epic sort of way. So the geometry is a trine from Pluto to the sun, and it's an exact trine. It's sun at 2 degrees Gemini, 2 degrees Pluto in Aquarius. What that means is that during the full moon, our conscious awareness is open to the ideas and the thoughts and the perceptions that we're having, as I have said. But because the sun is trining Pluto, it's like we have this wide open and easy access to the energy that does allow us to do deep unconscious releases, to allow an old idea and a perception pattern that doesn't serve you to die so that you can be reborn anew, free of the limiting thoughts that held you back. So if the idea of this full moon is to find the limiting thoughts you want to be free of, because that's what's possible, trust that Pluto trining the Gemini sun allows for the changes to occur, the death rebirth to take place. Pluto in a sextile with the Sagittarius moon, again, means that if we put the effort in, we get to enjoy the change and transformation that's possible. Sextiles, 60-degree angles, need action to deliver what they promise. So that means that if you are meeting this full moon with any kind of a ritualized intention, then you're doing the behaviors that will set you up to enjoy the backdrop energetic experience of release. And I would say that because Pluto is so directly participating in the full moon, you can think of this as a full moon that's going to be emotionally intense at the very least. So now here's where the Venus and Jupiter experience comes into play. During the full moon itself is when Venus and Jupiter are at this powerful 30th degree of Taurus. So I'm calling that the holding up of the promise that life can be just filled with nothing but love and expansion, which is true as long as you understand that, life is also brutal. And if you can be in a body that doesn't have your happiness depending upon how you feel, you can enjoy life as spectacular, even when it's sometimes uncomfortable. At any rate, having Jupiter and Venus at this powerful anaretic degree, so close to the sun to be conjunct. So that means that our conscious awareness is spilling its light of awareness into our hearts and our sense of possibility, Venus and Jupiter. They're in a different sign. They're in the sign that says this is how we create bounty, or this is where we create bounty, if that's a better way of putting it. So what that means for the full moon is that as you approach the idea of, okay, I'm going to release my anxieties, I'm going to release my limiting thoughts, you have the power of Venus and Jupiter giving you good reason to do the deep work. It's kind of like if I ask you to do something really hard, but you know that the benefit's going to be expansive and powerful, you're more likely to do the hard thing. Now, something that Venus and Jupiter are doing geometrically that's outrageously powerful is they're holding an exact sextile with Neptune at the 30th degree of Pisces. So remember, 30th degree is mastery. It counts that Venus and Jupiter are at 30th degree Taurus and that Neptune's at the 30th degree of Pisces. First of all, let's just talk about the geometry. They're in a sextile. That means that any and every effort and energy that you put into meeting this week head on will be rewarded, especially if you include your spiritual practice as part of how you meet the week, because Neptune is how we connect to Great Spirit. If nothing else, the Jupiter and Venus in a sextile with Neptune opens us up in a deeply connected way to manifestation mojo that says if we co-create with spirit, we can create the bestest lives we can. And therein is the hope. And then right next to that is the Gemini Sagittarius sun and moon in an opposition, creating like a psychic surgery where like one is the anesthetic and, mommy saying all is going to be well on the other side and the anesthesiologist saying just rest. And then over in the real world, we're moving through an epic full moon. And there might be, as a result of being in a full moon this week, endings, releases, things that go away. And we want to honor anything that looks like it wants to exit during this week because it's being driven out by a full moon that promises to take away from us some of the thought patterns that inhibit us, like overthinking, anxiety, etc. And then the last thing I'll say about this full moon is that over in Aries, where the North Node is still hanging out, we've also got Mars and Chiron close enough to be conjunct to that North Node in Aries. So the North Node always means our future, the North Star of us, the direction the collective is moving in. And by having Mars and Chiron conjunct the North Node during this full moon, I think it connects our bodies, where anxiety lives, to give up the ghost. Do you know what I mean? Like to give up some of the patterns. Like if you have anxiety and you don't always know why you're feeling anxious, it's because the initiating thoughts that create the anxiety are in the unconscious. And so unconscious wound will show up in the conscious awareness in the body as
Yes.
anxieties. Aries invented the body. So to have Mars in Aries, ruling sign, and the planet that rules the body right near Chiron, which holds the wound and helps us go into the unconscious where wounded thought patterns live and remove them, and having these two planets near the North Node of the future while we're in a full moon psychic surgery process means that what we drop now easily gets incorporated into our sense of forward movement and where we're headed, so we get to move with more freedom because we've dropped more dead weight. So the last thing I'll talk about in the astrology before we get into this week's dream interpretation sort of is the emphasis on this week shifting from a Taurus focus to a Gemini focus. That happened certainly today, Monday, as the sun moves into Gemini. But by virtue of having Venus and Jupiter at the 30th final degree of Taurus in the full moon, means that right after the full moon, both of them change signs and move into Gemini. So with Venus, it's the next day. On Friday of this week, Venus will move out of Taurus, her ruling sign, where she's very happy, and into Gemini. Now, she's not unhappy in Gemini. In fact, Venus in Gemini is fun and flirty and puts our mind and our intellect into our love places. So it can be an incredibly fun, and it's the shoot your shot placement. Like if you want to speak up to somebody that you're attracted to, do it when Venus is in Gemini, because the whole world wants to chit chat about love and intimacy and connection with Venus in Gemini. Jupiter moving into Gemini is fascinating from this perspective. Jupiter is the planet through which we manifest all of our abundance and prosperity. Because Jupiter's been in Taurus for the last bit, that's actually been a very valuable placement for us, because Taurus rules cash and prizes. Jupiter brings us cash and prizes. And so Jupiter in Taurus has put us in the mode of feeling deserving, to the extent that you do at an individual level, all the cash and prizes you could think to manifest and create. But with Jupiter moving into Gemini, what this highlights is the fact that if we don't start with ideas and clarity about what we want in a mental way, we can't manifest something. You can't manifest a desire unless you're really clear what that desire is. And Jupiter in Gemini puts easy access to words and thoughts that describe the abundance and prosperity we wish to create. So I do think that Jupiter's movement into Gemini is going to be helpful for us. We'll chat a little bit about this at the top of next week's podcast, just to sort of talk about the what to expect and when he goes retrograde and all that, because he will retrograde in Gemini, which he did not do in Taurus. So there's lots of yummy possibility in the 11 months or so that Jupiter's going to spend in Gemini, and the transition starts on Sunday. And so next Monday, we'll chat a little bit about Jupiter once again. Meanwhile, we got the full moon this week, kids, so strap in and have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show. This week we have an email in dream from Kayla. And her, the title of her email is Black Tongue Dream, Gross Warning.
Ha ha! I love it.
Kayla says, "Hi there. I wanted to send in my dream because I thought it was so strange. I love the podcast and listen every week. I'm typically an extremely heavy dreamer. I've always had very vivid dreams, and sometimes I cannot tell what's real and what's not when they are happening. Last night, I had a very strange one. I don't remember everything surrounding the main part of the dream, but in it, I had a black tongue. Not a hairy black tongue like I've seen online, but just black. I didn't have a black tongue the night before. and I was looking in the mirror and I was really freaked out. When I tried to scrape off the substance, it was goopy, and it seemed to have just grown right back instantly in front of me
Yeah.
and disappeared off my fingertips. I tried to brush my tongue over and over, and I couldn't seem to get rid of it. I ended up telling some people, and they were all stunned and had no idea what it may be, especially since the night before my tongue was fine. The dream felt so real, and I began to panic. Usually, as soon as my dreams get intense, it's like my body knows it's wake up time, and I woke up 1 minute before my 7 a.m. alarm. I have so many crazy dreams, but this one was definitely really weird. There wasn't too much else in the area. I tend to dream hop and have several dreams a night that can blend together. What could the meaning of a black tongue mean? Thanks for all you do, Kayla.
Wow, what a fabulous image. It's interesting. The black tongue is sort of all I really can comment on in the dream
Right.
because it's not like a whole lot of. This may be the shortest dream interpretation segment we've done, but
Oh,
it's well because again, what you read of her dream, there isn't much of a storyline for me to grab details.
hmm. Yeah, yeah.
The one detail is that it grows back instantaneously.
Hmm.
So we don't have a lot of information about what else, right? One piece of information we have is that if she tries to address it, it grows right back.
Yeah.
And the other piece was interesting that she's clearly that there, at least within the dream landscape, there's like a social agreement that this is weird and baffling and like, it wasn't there last night and now it's there, right? So those are the only two other pieces of info that I can, look to and interpret. Right? And so I'll start with those, right? Before we get into then the meaning of the black tongue itself. Certainly the idea that there's a problem that you try to fix and that the problem grows back, that implies that whatever is being expressed right now has deep roots. Right?
Hmm.
It's like if you cut a plant off and you think, "Ooh, I took care of that," but the roots are still there, it will grow again. So just the
Yeah.
fact that she can't get rid of this goop means that it has depth in terms of its attachment to her, right? So it's certainly there's a call to action there, right? If something that you're trying to get rid of grows back, the psyche is saying this superficial scraping off of it doesn't fix the underlying problem, right? That's so right there I get problem solution, so problem, goopy tongue, solution, scrape it off, and that might work for the afternoon, but then the next morning it's all back, or right away it comes back, right? Or,
Hmm.
that idea that last night she was fine and now her tongue is. In other words, there's more below the surface that's going to cause the challenge that the black tongue is representing to keep growing back. Somehow, all of the friends in a kind of chaotic agreement that this is weird, because remember, it's her dream. This isn't other people. It's about thoughts she's having, inner agreement that this problem that the dream is expressing is, in fact, baffling.
Mm.
Like, oh, gee, what is this? So then we have to look at the tongue. Colored tongues are interesting. They're all over mythology. Kali's red tongue is significant because she's usually thought of as black in color with this red tongue. And so there's something shadowy and powerful about her blackness that also means, that her voice and that which her tongue represents connects to, change and transformation and red of, passion and intensity. I don't off the top of my head, I can't think of any mythological black tongues, but certainly in the world of superstition and, cultural traditions, black tongue would connect to lying and deceiving
Hmm.
and bad communication.
Oh,
Yeah. The tongue articulates words. That's what it's for.
yeah.
So if the tongue articulates the words and the tongue is black, then the words that are coming out are black. And if I can scrape it off, that's like, oh, I can clean off this sort of shadow that's in my voice for a minute, but the underlying roots are there and they will grow back. So the sort of invitation, Kayla, is to take a look at where in your life would your communication be something that maybe needs your attention. Like, I can say sweeping things like black means shadow in your voice and lying and deceiving, but, like, I'm talking about the archetype there, right? So I'm not calling
Right.
you a liar, Kayla. I'm saying that your psyche is asking you to take a look at habitual uses of your voice that might be shadowy, that are pervasive because they're in you, but that at this time in your development, there's a desire to clean up how you speak. Whether it's to tell the truth more, to be more authentic, or to step into boundary setting more powerfully, or put your creative voice out into the world. Like, you're not here to talk about it, so I can't ask you these questions, but these would be the questions I would ask you, Kayla, if you were here. How do you think, if I tell you that I think the black tongue is about some limits or inhibitions or problems with how you use your voice, I would then ask you to share with me what you think about that and what you think we might be talking about. And there's, I think, the message of the dream. It's asking you
Hmm.
to have a deeper consideration of where the roots are to some of the challenging patterns you have that you're looking to release. And not for nothing, Zoe, once again, you picked a dream that is so perfect with the astrology because in a Sagittarius full moon, we're looking to release lower black tongue thoughts
Hmm.
in order to find the higher transformed thoughts that live inside of us. Beautiful.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.